An individual usually is employed to take up a role. The role pre-exists. We need somebody to do the following. Now there's the to do, which is to create value. Then we look for a person to take up that role in order to deliver that value, for which we, the company, will provide the individual with reward. That's the essential work contract, and if you look at any employment contract, it looks something along those lines. Eileen, you will come, you will take up the role of filmmaker, and you will deliver films, so many films of X quality and so forth, which we will sell, and that's the value you will create, and for that we will reward you with a monthly salary and sometimes a bonus at the end if you really, really do it beautifully. Simple, right? Okay. Now, if you look at that inherent work contract, seems like it should work all the time, but it doesn't work all the time. It has problems, and we could sort of break down where in that work contract those problems can exist, and I call those access points. So let's start with the most basic level. Firstly, the first axis could be that the role and your capability to take up that role, the experience you need, the ability required, the knowledge needed, might not be enough.
The passion even?
The passion, exactly. It might not be enough for you to truly make these movies, for example. You might not know enough about movies. You might be short on technical ability and so forth. So there's an access point between who you are in terms of your abilities and your background and what the role requires, and that access point can mean that value is not being created, and then meanwhile we're rewarding you, and it could go all wrong. And many times HR is involved in trying to get this right. But that access point can also be about, as you alluded to, passion. Could also be about, is this the kind of work I really want to do? Maybe I know how to do it, but I don't know if I really want to make movies or make these kinds of movies or make them in this way. And that is where coaching can come in on that access point and help broker, I use the word broker often, broker across that axis a better alignment so that more value, the right kind of value or the more value can be created. First access point. Second access point could be somewhere else. It could be you're perfectly good and perfectly happy at taking up this role and you deliver a lot of value, but it's not the value that they're looking for. 6 months later, they say, well, actually, those weren't the movies we were looking for. I know we said so, but we didn't. Or there could be a disconnect or a misalignment between the kind of output that you create, and you could create lots of kind, and they want you to do it this way, and you want to do it that way, or something like that, and you've gone ahead and created value, and they're saying, well, that's not the value one. Or they change the value halfway down. You've worked for a year or for 2 years, a new leader comes in and says, well, listen, that's not the value we want this value now. And suddenly you find yourself in a different, well, that's not what I like to do. Coaching can come in on that alignment. And then there's the reward part. Well, I don't think I'm getting the reward that I want. And when we say reward, we don't only mean it in terms of money. I mean, why do people work? Yes, people work for the money, and that's fine, and we're happy that they work for the money, and we all do, and so do I. But it's not only why I work. I work for recognition. I work for a sense of satisfaction. I work for a feeling that I can make a difference. I work because it gives me a sense that I am of value to others in the world, and therefore I feel meaning coming back to me from that point of view. Everyone works for all these other things. And so in the reward cycle, that's the next axis, you may not be getting the kind of reward, not just financial, that you're hoping to achieve from this cycle. Yeah. So on all those simple access points, coaching can be applied to improve the alignment and broker a better cycle of value creation, not just for the company, but also for you as an individual. So that's the simple level. I would call that just your sort of basic white belt, level of coaching. And most people think, well, that seems like a lot of work, I can do that. Unfortunately, it's not like that.
No, we need black belt stuff.
Yes. And before we even get to the black belt, there's like the orange and the green and all that, because the next level is that, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your ideology, most of the time you're not working alone. For that cycle of contract to work, not only is there one role with you taking it up, but there's someone else that is managing you in that role, and that is also a person in a role as the manager of you. And you also could be in that role managing others in their roles. And very often this is where the coaching access points play out, because you really do have the capability to take up the role and create value, and you are able to create the value exactly the way they want it, and you might even be rewarded in just the right way. But your manager and you in that relationship, chemistry is not right, or there's misalignment, or you're not connecting properly. And there's a relational disconnect on that axis, or you with your direct reports are having those disconnects. And then there are all those access points where coaching can come in to assist. And then that's not enough. Most of the people are working in a team. They're not alone. So then you have colleagues in a team who work together in a value chain. And then there are access points between you and your colleagues who are supposed to leverage each other's roles to create value under a manager. And some of you may also have direct reports. And that whole relational field needs to work together and align for value creation for each individual, but also for the whole team. And there's that whole area. Now imagine how many access points there are.
It's like a massive network.
Right, and we're only on Greenbelt.
Oh, okay.
We're only on Greenbelt.
But we're moving towards
But we're moving towards, because, so now you have to say, all right, well, hold on a second. If I'm going to coach an individual, and my purpose is to help the individual create value, not just for the company, but also for themselves, in all the alignment points, I see that they are not alone. Actually, it's not like this is not like a marital couple. No, that's too simple. Mm-hmm. This is like a marital team with a marital manager, and it gets really complicated.
In fact, it's closer to a kibbutz.
Exactly, yeah. And hence the title of the book is called Working with Complexity. Coaching and access, working with complexity in business and executive coaching, because you can imagine the complexity now of all these access points. So if someone sits down in front of you as a client and they say, I want to, deliver more value in my job. Can you coach me? And I'm now blind to all the other players in that diagram that we've just unpacked. I'll be like a surgeon that has no idea what the body looks like. It would be like, there's a problem with the heart. Oh, good. Well, we'll just work on the heart. But we forget that the heart's attached to the vascular system, that, there's a nervous system, there's muscles, there's bones, there's a brain. The person has to breathe. And you can't just take your scalpel and go straight into the heart and say, oh, there's the problem, cut. You've got to understand all the parts working together. And therefore, you have to understand all the other clients, which are all the other players in the system. So that's the systemic orientation, or understanding the system across all those relational axes.
And that's where you have to move from individualism to collectivism.
Correct. So then the client becomes the whole team, including the individual as the index sort of client. And that's green belt. But what about above green belt, blue belt, brown belt, black belt? Well, you find that actually the system is much broader than that. What about the customer who's in the game? What about the other people competing for that role in the talent pool? What about the other team that has to work with this team in a value chain across teams to deliver? Right? Mm-hmm. And what about then not just that team and that team, but what about that business unit with that business unit, or the competitor, or the service provider, plus the customer, all working in a complex matrix of relations, cascading up in levels into more senior leadership, or cascading down into multiple teams working on smaller projects and or tasks, all working together to create an aligned, value-creating company, being in the company of, company or organization. And so, when you start to see you coaching an individual, you realize, whoa, when I zoom out, this thing just gets more and more and more complex. And I can zoom into the individual and I can zoom out. And actually, I'm working with a multi-dimensional, multiple client reality, and I must be orientated in systems thinking about the system, not just the individual. And that's the black belt, so to speak.
Can I give you an example that I came across on Monday in a meeting with the leader and the client, which I think is just like, this is a highly results-driven organization. And so the leader says to me and to the guy that reports to him, so like the objective is clear. You have to double sales. This is a high growth business, competition's getting la 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 la, and that's it. You just got to pump this business.
Right.
And so, and I listen to all of this stuff and I make notes and the leader leaves and I've got 5 minutes left, and so I chat now to my client. So what did you think about that? He says, J for joke. He says, I can't do it because there is a freeze on all IT projects.
Right. So it's a classic.
Can't be done. Can't be done.
So you can see the system dependencies for the coaching goal are based in a cross-area capability. Yeah. We see the most common example would be where someone says, all right, my coaching is to sell X more product per year or something like that. That's really, and then you find, well, at the big macro level, the market has actually changed. The market's no longer interested in that product. Or, we're in a recession. So people can't purchase as much as they used to. But I've just doubled my targets. Be a simple one. The very common one is the disconnect between sales and the manufacturing side of life, where the guys that are actually producing the goods that the sales team are selling are saying, we can't produce the goods in that way, but the salespeople sell it in that way. Or we can't produce that many, but they sell it in that way. And then you get this tension between the two. And then you're asked, well, why don't you don't know that's happening, but you're asked to come and coach someone in the production side who's not performing and or is performing but is burnout or something. And you realize, well, that's very little to do with that individual, and it's more to do with the arrangement of demand across the areas. Or someone's acting out in a certain way and behaving in a way that others don't find acceptable, even though they're technically very strong, and you go and you just work on them as if they've got some screw loose. But meanwhile, they're acting out in that way because they've been put in an arrangement of relations that's an impossible situation. And unless you zoom out and see that, you're coaching blind to the situation. It's the same as, that would be the same as a heart surgeon going and says, a problem with the heart, it's not pumping enough blood, and the heart surgeon doesn't know that an artery has been cut in the leg and the blood is just coming out the leg, and the heart surgeon saying, what's wrong with his heart? Because he's not looking and seeing that the blood's coming out the artery.
It's a great metaphor.
So we see that all the time. And if we come back to our very first point, you see that a life coach orientation, life coach counseling orientation, highly individualistic, focused on personal growth and meaning, with this technique of asking questions and reflecting and so forth, the coaching technique and skill, is blind to this commercial reality, system reality, cultural reality. And with the best of intention, can be even counterproductive if you run in there like that.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Because you've got to have extremely good commercial savvy.
Correct.
To ask the right questions.
So this is the third, on those 3 points. On the third point is, the disconnect between the culture of health and well-being and so forth in human sciences and that of business. When you look at those 3 points and you say, what is the educational requirement to be a great coach? A great business coach or a great life coach? That's my retort. Well, which is it? I think that, it's different answers to the two. Whereas I think that a lot of training programs, sadly, and this is all over the world, train a generic coach and then apply yourself in different contexts, whether it's an individual in life or in business. But we can see now from what we've discussed that the capability required to do business coaching is a commercial Now, you put it as commercial savvy. It's a commercial savvy. You need to understand business. You need to be culturally aligned to business, and you need to be ethically contracted into the business arrangement. And how much of the training to become a coach these days, to get a ticket that says I'm a coach, is in business? Very little. Very little. Most of it's in psychology.
I don't know of many courses like the Gibbs one.
Yeah. So the Gibbs program is fairly unique because it says we're not training you to be a generic coach applied to business. We're training you from the get-go in business coaching. And that means that there's an appreciation of the fact that there's a range of educational requirements that are necessary to do this, which have to begin on level 1. And I think that's where the world's going. I think that in a few years' time, it won't be this generic coaching training. It will be, well, what do you want to be? You want to be a surgeon, or do you want to be a dermatologist? And I know maybe it's not such a great analogy because you think, well, you're a general practitioner first. Okay, maybe, but,
I think the business world is so different, having come from the business world. I think it is so different to the psychological world. It is absolutely chalk and cheese. And if you don't feel it, you don't get it.
Yes. It's a cultural context.
It's a cultural context.
That's why I put in the book, and I know you took issue with it, and I think you're right on your point, but I put in the book that it bothers me that there are coaches that have their practice room at home, and they get all their business coaching clients to get in their car and drive from their place of work, on the hour, and sit in the coach's practice room, usually attached to their house, and the coach, in some cases, never visits the business place where the person works.
And that's not right.
Yeah, and if you go to their practice room, you usually see, the pot plant and the clock and the box of tissues and the bookshelf where they've selected their books and the nice carpet, and there's no table between the two chairs. But it looks like a counseling room. It's a therapy room.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah.
I knew you wouldn't be able to resist.
I can't resist. Now, you can coach in that context if you like. You can coach in any context. You can coach in a coffee shop. You can coach in the person's office. You can coach in a therapy room. But when you are focused in coaching in a therapy room and all your clients are coming to you on the hour, clock, you have to ask yourself, are you a business coach or are you a life coach counselor? Because actually, culturally, you look like a life coach counselor, and there's an individual coming to you, pulled out of their context. So, yes, I think the critique is it's sometimes powerful for people to leave their work and have that reflective drive in the car, going to a place out of there and really think, in a reflexive way back to the company. I think that's true. But it's not necessarily a requirement for every coaching. You have to say, look, it seems that for you, Eileen, as the person being coached, you're going to benefit, given what we've been discussing, in actually leaving the office and coming to my place and using that reflective space, because I can see that that's going to be valuable for this coaching with these outcomes. Not an automatic requirement. Yeah. And my issue is that a lot of coaches do it because they have fantasies of being a therapist, or if they don't, it's really convenient to take your diary and have your clients come to you on the hour each time. I mean, that's really convenient and probably cost effective and stops you driving around from office space to office space.
It's true what you say. But I do think it's a massive risk for the whole engagement if the coach is not interacting with the organization. And as you're now going to talk about Sumantra Goshal, I'm sure, the smell of the place. If the coach doesn't get the smell of the place, then you are strongly in danger of sitting anywhere, it doesn't matter where it is, and forgetting the system, forgetting the multiple relationships around that person.
You use the term smell of the place, which is something that Goshal used, who was professor at NCR in London Business School, who passed away some years ago, but he used that term smell of the place, and he would say that when you walk into an organization, and he didn't mean it literally, although some organizations may be true, but you walk into an organization, into its building, and there's a smell. You can get a sense. It's an intuitive sense of the energy of it. It's a cultural idea. Compare if you walk into, a Google office versus a government a bureaucracy office, what is the smell that you get? And that sense is what is missing from coaches who don't travel to the areas of work. I mean, he talks about how, Ghoshal talks about how, he's from Calcutta, well, he was from Calcutta in India, and how in Calcutta in India in the afternoons, it would be very humid and very, very hot, particularly in summer. And when he traveled there to visit his family, he would find himself sort of sleeping in the afternoons. And many people have a sort of, in hot countries, they have a sort of siesta in the afternoon, and shops sometimes even close. And when he was at INSEAD in the forests of Fontainebleau, which is there, in spring in particular, he said even if he was tired and he went for a walk in the forest, he would sort of have a kick in his step. It would wake him up, and he'd want to sort of jump up and catch a branch or something. And he makes that analogy because he says, a lot of companies have created downtown Calcutta in summer inside themselves. And then they say to people, well, you must take initiative and you must, go the extra mile and you must always be innovative. But meanwhile, people are lying, sleeping next to their desk because the humidity and the smell of the place is just oppressive. And, when you're coaching someone inside an organization and you don't know what it's like, is it downtown Calcutta or is it Fontainebleau Forest in spring? You don't know what the smell is in the context they work in, and yet you're trying to help them deliver in that space. And if you get in your car and arrive at the building and walk in, meet people and get a feel, it creates a sense of context. It's like looking at the body before you enter the surgery, So that's the first point. I mean, the Chinese in there there's a book called Sun Tzu, which is it's by Sun Tzu actually, but it's called The Art of War. It's thousands of years old. They talk about how a great general puts soldiers to battle like rolling round rocks down a steep incline. And what is meant by this is that it's not enough to get rocks to roll down to roll. It's not enough to make them round, because if the incline is flat, it doesn't matter how beautifully you've shaped the individual to be round, they'll stand still. So the incline is the smell of the place or the context. If that incline is dipped, even if they're not very round, they could be quite square, they start to roll. So ultimately what you want is the individual, and the context is the rock and the incline. You need to understand the relation between the two to get a sense of the movement that's required for delivering value. And as a coach, that's the axis between the rock and the incline.
And then it brings up all, which is maybe outside of this discussion, but the ethical dilemmas about the coach being honest with the organization.
Yes.
Which I certainly do have those conversations with the group because that's an undeliverable coaching contract, actually.
Or you get the flip of that, where you get a head of an area who's procuring coaching for themselves and is blind to the fact that he or she is leading an organization and there's a whole feedback loop that's going on, and because he or she has the power, they contract with you as the coach to work blind to the system. And they're allowed to because they control the budget. And then you're complicit ethically and you go, oh, fantastic, this is easy, and off you go. And you don't have consequences that are immediate because they're in the pound seat and they're controlling the purse. Even in those situations, the ethical coach is saying, hang on a second, Mr. or Ms. CEO, let's understand how other people are thinking and feeling about the organization and you and your leadership, and let's start working systemically as well.
In terms of, we've actually spoken about the distinctive features, we've spoken about the worldview, and that we've spoken about the problematic narratives that coaches have. We've spoken a little bit about the Hofstede and individualism versus collectivism. And you've drawn the picture for me verbally, so I'll draw it for the classroom physically. Just to say that why they need a black belt, and see if you agree with my comments, that business coaches have to strive to hold the entirety of the person's relationships to everything in mind all the time.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
they have to be fully present.
Correct.
Fully, 100% focused and present.
Right.
And on top of that, they have to be clear about their own filters, their own multiple structures, their own worldview and how it might be interfering all at the same time. And they have to be extremely skilled at understanding how organizations work. They have to be highly skilled at business acumen, not financial literacy, knowing how to score it, but how to improve the score is the distinction.
Yeah.
So there's actually a huge, among other things, there's a huge ask on business coaches, much more than there is on life coaches.
Yes. What I would say is, again, I use the term complexity to describe exactly what you've said, which I think is spot on. Life coaching is a very valuable and important and useful modality, as is counseling and so forth. But the level of complexity in working in life coaching versus the level of complexity in working in business coaching, based on all the access points, just on the analysis of those access, the orientation required, the dual sort of walking the tightrope between the client, the individual client and the organizational client, the system and understanding system theory and working systemically and working with individual psychology in the same way you do with life coaching, plus having business understanding as well as the psychological understanding you have in life coaching. That's a much greater level of complexity and a much bigger ask, and indeed deserves greater reward for good outcomes. And that's why business coaches charge multiples of what life coaches charge, and they should. But they should really only do that if they really are providing business coaching in the way we've described it. Then they're entitled to charge, thousands of rands for a session. But if they're providing life coaching in the cloak of business coaching, then my view is they're out of integrity. And most coaches that are doing that don't even know they're out of integrity. Yeah. They don't mean to. They just aren't aware that this is really what the service is supposed to look like to earn those kinds of fees. And that's something I'm hoping will change in industry. And the procurers of coaching in industry, the businesses, need to wake up to demand this kind of service and to also organize themselves culturally to be able to procure it in this way. I think that's another problem, is that companies think of coaching as an event-based one-on-one engagement, and they procure it along those lines, like a sort of one-on-one training event or something like that. And they really need to not do that. They really need to think about procuring coaching in the same way that consulting is procured, where there's a kind of scope of work, and there's a kind of maps not the territory, but here's a map, and as we go we'll recontract and see how we are, because we learn by engaging and then change and make correction. And also we're not working with an individual alone, we're working with the individual and the whole organization. So if companies could think about procuring business coaches in the same way they procure management consultants, not the way they procure trainers, they're going to get a much better outcome, and they'll also make room for coaches to deliver coaching on the axis, real business coaching, not life coaching in this series of events. And that's a whole other piece.
Well, that's also part of educating the coaches that are coming through these processes are being educated. And there are a lot of businesses out there they've never had any coaching. They don't know anything.
Yes.
So actually, coaches who are educated can help organizations put in the proper frameworks.
Correct.
Right
Correct.
from the beginning.
You've got to dance from both sides.
Yeah.